This is Joshua Karievsky. You are listening to the Agile Uprising podcast.
Hello and welcome to the latest installation of the Agile Uprising podcast. From the Agile Uprising, I am Ryan Lockard. We also have Andrew Leff. Say hello.
Hey guys.
And Colleen Johnson.
Hello.
Hey. Today we have the very well-known David Anderson on with us. How you doing, David?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're very happy to have you. So I guess to get started, for anyone that may not be familiar with who you are, first of all, it's a shame for them. But do you mind just giving a quick introduction of who you are and basically what your background is?
Oh, I hate doing that. So embarrassing. I'm best known as the guy who created the Kanban Method, and I've written 4 books. And the best known of those is Kanban, Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Organization, published in 2010. I'm the chairman of a company called Lean Kanban Incorporated, which offers my management training throughout the world, really, and a series of conferences known as Lean Kanban conferences. We do some publishing, some consulting, professional services in addition to that. I've been in the Agile movement really since the beginning, since before we called it Agile. I was involved in developing a banking system, and as part of doing that, we created something called feature-driven development, which was one of the original Agile methods. And I've been involved in the process methodology space pretty much ever since. One other more notable thing I've done over the years, I was the co-author of the official Software Engineering Institute guide on CMMI and Agile. Cool.
And again, for anyone that may not know, your accent has a very strong New Jersey twang to it, right? That's the background.
Yeah, the joke is, of course, that I'm from Texas, because I first arrived in the United States and I lived in Dallas, Plano, Texas, actually, in 1999. But I'm originally from Scotland.
Right.
Fairly East Coast.
I was gonna make the Texas joke, but I literally spoke with I had an interview with Kelly Waters recently, and he's a London-based Agile practitioner. And I did the so you're obviously from Texas joke there. So I reused the joke, but I changed the state.
Yeah.
So can you just go in and give us a little bit of the origins of the Kanban method?
I think perhaps the most interesting thing is I didn't really understand its origins until I did a book in 2012 called Lessons in Agile Management, which was a collection of my blog posts over 12 years with some updated commentary, and some sort of thought went into how to construct a story out of all these blog posts. And it wasn't all of them. We threw lots of them on the editing room floor to pick the best ones. And what I realized was that there had been 2 threads running in my career through the first few years of the first decade of this century. And the first of those was that scaling Agile adoption in large corporations like Sprint or Motorola, where I'd been working, was actually really difficult and tended to produce lackluster, mediocre results, didn't deliver on expectations. And when I'd seen this a couple of times, I'd come to the conclusion that it really didn't matter what methodology you picked. that regardless of whether you thought it was better than some other one, there would always be someone, maybe a lot of someones in the organization, who would resist. They just wouldn't like it because, you know what, it's not what we do now. It's not what I do now. It's different, and I just don't like that. So by really before the end of 2002, I'd come to the conclusion that people resist the adoption of new ways of working, and it just doesn't matter what the new way is. It's not a case of my agile method's better than yours. It doesn't really matter. You could find the best one ever, and you'd still get hundreds or thousands of people in a large corporation who would resist adopting it. Even though they would tell you it made perfect sense to do it, they would still resist. So I'd come to the conclusion while I was writing my first book, which was called Agile Management, that I was writing the wrong book, solving the wrong problem. But despite that, I had a contract with the publisher, so the book was finished and I published it. So I'd come to the conclusion that we had to stop using prescriptive methodologies, coming along and saying, here's my list of practices we need to have you adopt, because it's a better way of working. Honest it is. Please get on with it. We had to stop all of that completely, and we had to have a whole different way of thinking, which is you start with what you do now, and you ask people, what are you unhappy about? You ask the workers, you ask their customers, you ask them about what's affecting their ability to do a good job and delight people with their efforts. And if you get a decent response to that, you go about fixing it. So that was one thread. Let's teach organizations how to find their number one problem and fix it, and then promote number two and look at that and fix it, and so on and so on. And the result would be that every organization would have its own uniquely tailored, uniquely adapted processes. There would be no more textbooks full of descriptive, prescriptive methods. Then the other thread, which is a separate problem, was that I'd been looking at the use of pull systems, of systems that limit the work in progress and make you defer commitment until you've got capacity to work on something. Originally, I'd been looking at Ellie Goldratt's concept called drum buffer rope, which is a weird name, and let's not even bother to try and explain that metaphor. No. And then I'd been alerted to become aware of the use of Kanban systems at Toyota, which is very similar. It's one of a family of different ways of limiting work in progress and only pulling work when you have capacity to do it. And I started to apply that idea, first of all, with a software maintenance team at Microsoft. And then a few people copied it, different companies. I think Robert Bosch might have been the second place to do it. And eventually I got to try it at a much bigger scale while I was the senior director of software engineering at a Bill Gates company called Corbis, based in downtown Seattle. So that took us to about 2007. And that's where the two ideas, these two separate threads of we want evolutionary change, and we're using Kanban systems to deal with slow, unpredictable service delivery. Those two things converged in January of 2007 when a manager who worked for me called Darren Davis put a board up on the wall, visualized the workflow and said, okay, now the team are empowered to figure out what's our number one problem and what they should do about it. So we had a Kanban system in place, we had a visual board, and we had this ethos of evolutionary change, and the three things converged into what we now call the Kanban method.
And for the folks that might not be super familiar with the principles behind the Kanban method, could you give us a brief introduction to those?
Oh, expecting me to quote the textbook off the top of my head. So the whole idea that you start with what you do now, and at least initially you respect everyone's role, responsibility, job title, none of that changes. The organizational structure shouldn't change. That's a core principle. And that we embrace the idea of evolutionary change, adapting what we do now and just gradually getting better at it, rather than some sort of wholesale change to some new way of working. And we believe that the evolutionary change is better as a consequence. That's really at the heart of it. And I think more recently, I defined some service delivery principles that had really been true from the beginning, that we want to improve service delivery for a kickoff, that we identify that there's a customer and they have expectations, and that our focus is to improve our capability to meet customer expectations. And therefore there is this desire to improve and please customers, and that the essence of the method is very customer focused, that it's not internally facing and internally focused, it's externally facing, and it's about improving service delivery as a whole in organizations, business units, product units as a whole.
And there's obviously a lot of...
Paraphrasing.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, go. I'm just...
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of lean origins in that customer focused and customer centric side of the Kanban method. How do you position the Kanban method in relationship to Agile?
I think it's worth talking about the lean thing first. W. Edwards Deming was a big influence on my work in the early part of the century, the first 3 or 4 years of the century. And of course, Deming was a big influence on Toyota's methods. So there's a link there. And in terms of what I've been doing with Kanban, it's focused on relief from overburdening and smoothing out unevenness and flow. And the Japanese have a couple of words for those. Muri is overburdening and mura is unevenness. And where the lean authors used a single word in English, which was waste, the Japanese really used 3 words, the muri, mura, and muda. Muda meaning non-value adding activities. And a lot of other lean literature is very focused on muda. It's focused on identifying non-value adding activities and eliminating them. And really where my work differentiates from that is when you're applying lean in a knowledge worker environment, software development, professional services, where people are thinking for a living, there are a lot of roles that are important, but they're not adding value directly to the end product. People with job titles like project manager or risk manager, portfolio manager, anyone involved in coordinating the effort or assessing the risks or doing planning type activities, everything they do would be labeled as muda, as waste, as non-value adding. And it happens that if you label everything someone does as waste, it's not a huge step for them to suddenly think, oh, so you're labeling me as waste. Where Kanban focuses on the overburdening and the unevenness and things that people actually feel emotionally. We feel overburdened, we feel stressed, we feel the stop-go nature of the work that we're doing, we feel the lack of coordination, we see the delays, we feel the consequences of those. We suffer from the unpredictability of the environment that we're in. So if you can fix those, if you can relieve people from overburdening, and you can smooth out the flow and make the system more predictable, the human beings actually get a really positive response from that. They like it. It's helping them. It's making them feel better about themselves, better about coming to work. Versus we could label you as waste, and we could tell you that we need to reduce the waste. So I think that's an important thing. But you asked a question about how we align Kanban with Agile. Really, I did a talk at the Agile Conference, Main Stage 2008, on this topic about underlying Agile values and how Kanban helps improve agility without necessarily embracing any specific Agile practices. So I think it's important for people to look at the underlying values and principles and the objectives that Agile had, the idea that you should be able to make progress with imperfect information and course correct later, the idea that you should have a high trust environment, and the idea that you should focus on fast delivery, reducing cycle times, treating work in progress as though it was a liability rather than an asset, and therefore you drive fast cycle times, and you achieve a lot of that because you've empowered people and you're relying on a lot of tacit knowledge. You're not wasting time negotiating contracts or auditing that they're being fulfilled correctly, and that mostly requirements are being passed by word of mouth and tacit information. And that you're very failure tolerant, that you're willing to do some work and show it to people and get a reaction, make some changes. Kanban either helps you do that or is at worst agnostic to it. So it's very compatible with Agile values, and it's self-evident that it improves the agility of organizations.
So when you're sort of walking down the sort of values discussion, and is there a way to deliver? Do you prefer to do that via a Kanban system, or is there a place for Scrum as well? How do you sort of figure out which better suits the organization, or do you have a method that you would choose one over the other?
So I think that's really a wrong question, because Scrum is a prescriptive software development methodology. It's a way of managing software development and organizing people to do it. Kanban's a completely different animal, really. So if you didn't have a way of doing your software development and your organization was fairly nascent and immature, and you need some way of organizing your people to get stuff done, then Scrum might be a fair enough choice for that. And we certainly see plenty of case study examples of nascent or very immature, somewhat chaotic organizations, and they adopt Scrum and it helps them. And sometimes it helps them forever, and other times it helps them for a while, and then they start to struggle with it and they start to look for something else. It's not an accident that Ken Schwaber, one of the creators of Scrum, his website's called controlchaos.com. So if you're in chaos, Scrum will help you control it. Kanban's really a different animal. If you already know how you're working, if you have a way of working, it could be Scrum, it could be anything really. It could be something quite old-fashioned. It could be something you've developed on your own, unique to your organization, your company. Regardless, if you can describe it, if you can describe what I do and where the work came from and where it goes next, and you can effectively map workflows from the point where a customer asked for something to the point where you deliver it to the customer, you can Kanban that. And for everywhere you can conceive of a professional service, people who do knowledge work activities, at the request of someone and produce some work product, which economists or accountants would describe as intangible goods. Wherever you can see that in your organization, you can Kanban it. So we teach Kanban as identify the services in your organization and go Kanban each one incrementally.
So
it's a very different animal from Scrum.
Within a software organization, is there anything other than the inability to map the workflow, or, as you stated, a delivery model that was pure chaos? Is there anything else that would prevent Kanban from being successful, or is that literally the only thing in your experience that blocks effective Kanban method?
Well, over the years, we've had the mutations, the adaptations, the variants of Kanban that have emerged in the market, one of which is called personal Kanban. So even when you can't map a workflow, it's still possible for people to use Kanban at a personal level, and it will still help. Generally, it relieves them individually of overburdening, and it results in some quality improvement. And then there's a slightly bigger brother version of that called Team Kanban, which is like personal Kanban for you and your 2 or 3 immediate colleagues. And again, you don't need to be able to map a workflow. There's just a bunch of stuff you have to get done as a team. And Kanban will relieve you as a team from overburdening and help you focus on what you're currently working on and what you should work on next. And as a result, people will feel better, quality will improve. And usually with quality improving, delivery times reduce. So everyone thinks, well, that's great. So it's not to say that mapping a workflow is a prerequisite, but for a higher maturity Kanban that produces more significant economic results, it's definitely required. The other thing that I think we've identified over the years in software development, which is a prerequisite capability, is some form of configuration management and version control. Because if you have a Kanban system where you decoupled the input from the lead time through the system from the deliveries, so for example, unlike Scrum, where you might have 2-week sprints, and every 2 weeks you do a planning and then you sprint for 9 days and do some software development. And the idea is that you've got some increment of code which is finished at the end of that 2 weeks and now it's ready to be delivered. With Kanban, those 3 concepts of the planning, the length of time you work on something, and the delivery frequency, those are completely decoupled. So you could be planning every week, and something you start this week might take you 6 weeks to complete, and you might be doing deliveries to the customer every 2 weeks. And those things can be separate. Well, this introduces a challenge, which is, how do you deliver the finished work to the customer while you've got other work that's half finished, that's in flight, that's in progress? And that requires some configuration management strategy, of which there are sort of 3 accepted flavors. There's the branch and merge type of flavor. There is the labeling and relabeling flavor, and the currently trendy approach, which is to use feature toggles in the code to switch off things which are partially complete and you don't want them released into the wild. And that technique is prevalent at some of the bigger Kanban implementations. For example, the Xbox One group at Microsoft. Xbox One is built using Kanban, and they use the feature toggling approach to configuration management. And that's documented in a book by a guy called Eric Brechner. It's called Kanban Project Management, maybe. You might need to check the title for that. But it's on the Microsoft Press if people want to learn about how Xbox uses Kanban really quite considerably large scale.
That's awesome, because that's one I haven't read, and it's exactly in line with something that I'm working on professionally. I'm not building an Xbox, but my teams are working on something relatively large, and I'm in the process of standing up a new Kanban team of 18 people. So it's going to be something I'm gonna have to dig.
Yeah,
in.
Eric's been a speaker at our conference at least 2 years out of the last 3 or 4. And the manuscript for that book, I reviewed it as he was writing it, and I think it's really very instructional if you're doing software development in a large product scale, but you have to put out incremental releases, and you want to do Kanban. If that's your context, it's a fantastic book for that. I don't know that it would be so terribly useful if you were trying to apply Kanban in a very different context, for example, an advertising agency. I think that Eric's book wouldn't be the best choice in that circumstance.
Yeah. Yep. So you mentioned the Xbox project being a large scale use of Kanban. How do you view scaling technology work specifically to the Kanban method and the Kanban principles? I think this is a obvious answer, but does Kanban scale?
Yeah. So I'm not sure I understood the first question. The second question is a simpler one. Even in the very beginning, before we documented it, we'd done Kanban at 150 people sort of scale, a product unit scale. For some people listening will know that 150 is known as the Dunbar number, and it's a sort of magical threshold that a tribe of people who sort of work together to get stuff done. 150 seems to be a good number. It is the threshold number for the size of a product unit at Microsoft, for example. So we'd already done it at that level, and while I don't consider that to be particularly big, I think a lot of Agile people think scale's 30 or 40 people, and I think 30 or 40 people's trivial. 30 or 40 people's a single Kanban board. A product unit where you might have 150 people, and you might have as many as 10, 12 Kanban boards. It's a network of interacting services, maybe multiple projects. Perhaps they're making more than just the one product inside the unit. They've got a platform, underlying platform, and they've got some different flavors of it. So we could do that in the beginning, but it didn't take very long after that before some people started to do it at a bigger scale. We started to see sort of 450, 600 people, multiple product units, entire business units implementing it. There was one at Petrobras in Rio de Janeiro. Petrobras is the Brazilian oil company. It's the largest company in South America. And they had a product unit that made software for the oil exploration industry, applications, for example, processing seismic survey data, that kind of thing. 5 different products coming out of that, and about 450 people. I think somewhere between 12 and 15 Kanban systems, 5 shared services. They had a platform group and 5 applications. So we started to see that scale in terms of like an integrated program. The stuff all works together. It's not just a bunch of independent things in the one building. We started to see that by about 2009, 2010. But now there are some really very big scale implementations. Huawei, which is a telephone equipment and consumer electronics company in China, they have at least 5,500 people using Kanban across about 14, 15 different product units. A bank in China called Ping An and another one called CMB, or China Merchants Bank, they have 3,500 and 5,000 people using Kanban. And these are the sort of scales of implementation that we see nowadays. So yes, it scales, but it really always did. That's why it frustrates me when people talk about scaled agile methods and frameworks and they omit Kanban from that discussion, because the Kanban method, even just as it's documented in my blue book, as it's known, it is already at a product unit scale. And since then, we can demonstrate much bigger implementations. But we do have a wrapper for these big implementations to help with the orchestration of the work, the scheduling, the sequencing, the dependency management. And that wrapper is known as enterprise services planning. And while Huawei are pursuing the adoption of that, and they have some quite big ambition for it, really the poster child for adoption is at a company called Adigio, based in Barcelona. That's the name of the holding company that owns a number of online travel agency brands in Europe. They're actually the world's second largest online travel agent after Expedia. And they have a essentially enterprise scale, enterprise service planning, Kanban implementation. They've been at it now for about 3 years. It's really very impressive. But I know some people will want to know the numbers. It's about 1,800 people.
That's incredible. So I guess anybody that's read the Blue Book, or anyone that's done any research into Kanban, is familiar with some of the metrics that you position there, without going into every different chart, graph, and detail about the metrics in the book itself. Can you go into what the top 3 or so metrics are for that effective organizations care about when they measure Kanban delivery?
Sure. I'm not even sure that the book is that good on metrics, and we've learned a lot more since the book was written. The key metric is the lead time that something takes from the commitment point to when it's delivered to the customer. And why? Because the customer cares. I asked you for something, I ordered a pizza. When will my pizza be delivered? And then related to that is just the definition of what do we mean by commitment. It has to be mutual. The customer asked for something, but the delivery side also committed to deliver it. So at the point where that commitment becomes two-sided, from that point until when the item is delivered to the customer, how long does that take? And then related to that, we're interested in the spread of variation that happens there, not just the average or the minimum and maximum, but the probability distribution function, the shape of the curve of that pattern, because that tells us a lot about how predictable, how reliable a service is. And it's really a key metric for focusing process improvement. While there are other metrics there, they're not really worth talking about too much. Another one that we're reasonably well known for that came from Lean is flow efficiency, which is the difference between the lead time or the ratio of the amount of time you spend working on something versus its lead time. So if something takes 10 days to deliver to the customer, but you only worked on it for 1 day, then it's 10% flow efficient. And why we like flow efficiency is it really tells us where the leverage is. If something has very low flow efficiency, and I have to say that's very typical, the very first Kanban we did at Microsoft, they were 8% flow efficient when we started and 91% flow efficient when we finished. But at 8%, we thought, wow, that's really lousy. Well, nowadays we see numbers like 2%, 1% as starting positions. So the interesting thing is, if something's only 1% flow efficient, it means 99% of the time that it takes to deliver something to the customer is delay. It's not the time people spend working on things that really affect the productivity. It's how much time things get delayed. So if we know we have low flow efficiency, we can focus management attention on driving down the delays. And this is good because it allows organizations to dramatically improve their performance, but none of the workers actually have to change the way they work. They don't need to adopt new working practices. They don't need to learn any new skills, because the problem is with the waiting time and not with the working time. So flow efficiency and lead time and the probability distribution function of the lead time are the three most critical things.
Awesome. And I think you also, it's got to be the Blue Book that I read this, or maybe I heard you speak about it, using operation reviews or operational reviews or monthly operating reviews. I forget exactly what the label is, as a means to communicate not just delivery metrics, but also business metrics, talking about the value that's being generated by the work. I think you said it's probably one of the most effective communication patterns in organizations. I was curious if you could give a little context on why you put so much value in those monthly operating reviews.
Yeah, so the operations review, for those listening with more of an agile background, you'll be familiar with the concept of a retrospective. And the equivalent of that in Kanban is known as a service delivery review, a retrospective on how well is our one Kanban board doing, our one little Kanban system. How well are we doing as a team or as a small organization? That's a service delivery review. An operations review is a bigger thing. It's typically at a product unit level or maybe a bit larger business unit level. And it serves, I think, two critical purposes. And I think what you're alluding to is what I'd written in the Blue Book, where I said that the operations review was the linchpin or the keystone to making a Kanban initiative work.
Exactly, yep.
Because it provides the feedback mechanism that allows you to deal with the interaction between different parts of the organization, different nodes in the network. And it's typically those in-between bits that are causing all the delay. So if you want to improve the flow efficiency, say your development team has a whole bunch of stuff that's delayed because you're waiting on the architecture team or the platform team doing a modification, or the database administrators changing a schema and loading a bunch of new, migrating data across from the old schema to the new one. All of those things are delays. And an operations review gives you the forum to discuss those things as a bigger system of systems, as a network of different professional services within an organization. So that's really important. And then related to it is, imagine the pressure. If you're a manager, could be a team lead or some slightly more senior level manager, and you're told you need to come to the monthly operations review and stand up in front of an audience of 100+ people and present, what do we do? What's the demand for it? What are the customer expectations? How good are we at delivering? And how well are we meeting those customer expectations? And you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes to stand in front of the audience to show 4 or 5 charts and graphs and tell a story about how good we are at what we do. That focuses managerial attention very acutely, because often I encounter managers who struggle to articulate what it is they do. What's the work item that they actually process, and what does the customer ask for, and how many did they ask for this month, and how long did it take to deliver them, and how many of them were delivered within expectation, and so on. And just that concentrating factor, this idea you have to stand in front of the audience and present that information, changes behavior, it changes the culture in the company. Not only is it creating a lot more transparency and a much higher trust environment, it is teaching managers what their real job is, to manage the flow of work and improve service delivery for the customer.
Huh.
So the
when
operations
you're
review is doing both of those things for us, and that's what makes it the keystone to the whole method.
So when you're talking about sort of those themes and patterns, what are some of the misconceptions that people might have when dealing or even entering into sort of the Kanban model?
Misconceptions. I think people with an agile background have often heard fairly trivial descriptions of what Kanban is. It's just a board on the wall, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of that. It's a board on the wall. It's a task board. It's a team level process. There's a failure to understand even what a Kanban system is, that the limiting the work in progress, that the pooling work when you have capacity to do it, that's really the core of it. I think there's a failure to understand that it is designed to work for really any professional service, that you can Kanban really a whole organization, and there's always had this much larger scale and external focus. I think the Agile community for a long time was very internally focused, very obsessed with relieve me from my stressful situation, relieve me of the abusive environment that I'm working on, just leave me alone to do good quality work. And it was software craftsmanship for the sake of it. It was like, leave me alone to create beautiful code, beauty in the eyes of the developer as the beholder, and not particularly focused, or not nearly enough focused on the external world of who's the customer, what did they ask for, what are their expectations. And I still run into that a lot of Kanban, low maturity Kanban implementations, and people say, yeah, we don't see the point in the lead time metric, we don't do that and nobody cares. And that to me is usually a sign that they don't know who their customer is and they don't know what their customer values. Because it's very, very unusual to find in any walk of life a customer who doesn't care about the delivery time.
David, how do you make sure that the Kanban method continues to evolve to address the changing landscape, not just in Agile, but just in business in general?
So we certainly have ways for people to participate and contribute. And there's been a lot of evolution. If you look back over the last 10 years, we've seen portfolio Kanban, personal Kanban, upstream Kanban, sometimes called discovery Kanban or customer Kanban, team Kanban. More exotically, there's Mike Burrow's values-based change method known as agenda shift. All of these things are things that evolved out of Kanban. So partly it was to do with creating a fairly loosely cohesive community that wasn't conformist in nature, that it was willing to keep experimenting, keep challenging, keep modifying things for situations, just giving permission. And I think there's a sentence in the Blue Book that says this: you have permission to evolve your own uniquely tailored process that's specific for your situation, your context. And elevating that to a community level value has kept Kanban evolving and thriving. I think related to that, we have this other value that we really care about customers. And we also take the view that, the situation you're in is the situation you're in. It got to be that way because it did. And therefore, we're going to not pass any judgment on it. This no judgment approach, particularly when I'm teaching Kanban coaches, and Colleen's been through that training. She knows that I teach them not to come in with an agenda of we are here to agilize you, and not to walk in with a judgmental approach of, oh, you're doing it all wrong. To take more of an approach of, okay, things are the way we are. Clearly, everyone isn't happy, or you wouldn't have invited me to be here to help you. So let's figure out what it is you're unhappy about, and let's see what we can do about it. And as a consequence of that, we continue to see evolution. We continue to recognize real problems. Enterprise services planning really emerged as a direct consequence of that. My view had always been, if you can do an operations review, it's good enough. That people will figure out how to schedule work. They will figure out how to provide some kind of reservation system or manage dependencies. It will be an emergent outcome of discussing the problem at the operations review. And then as the years went by, I began to realize that leaving it as an exercise for the reader, hold your operations review, discuss the shit that's going wrong and fix it, that wasn't getting us there fast enough. So providing additional guidance where we know solutions we know that had worked, providing guidance on those, not necessarily in a prescriptive way, but as a, other people in your situation tried this and it helped them. What do you think? That is helping. And therefore, what I see at the moment is a fair bit of gap filling, where things had been left as exercises for emergence to happen. We're now filling those gaps with advisory guidance. For example, the idea that there are two roles in Kanban, the service delivery manager role and the service request manager role. They're not prescribed, but they're observed in the actual environment as things that may become necessary. And sometimes they get called other funky names like the flow manager, the flow master, etc. But documenting those and serving them up to people as something that might help them, might fill a gap, that's where we're seeing the evolution at the moment. The growth is a lot of this gap filling.
So anybody that follows you on Twitter gets to get a window into what it's like to travel as David Anderson. I think.
Yeah, if you follow my personal account, that's true. For those who don't know, I compartmentalized my life into a professional and a personal account a few years ago, and I highly recommend it. It's really helped me manage my stress levels.
So that being said, I have to ask this. What is the best airline to fly?
Wow.
Currently, because I imagine levels of service change.
Obviously, I get a limited exposure, but I probably get exposed to more than others. In terms of the big alliances, I prefer One World to either of the other two, the Star Alliance or the Sky Team. And the reason for that is that with the possible exception of American, the One World airlines are all really very good consistently, and the quality of the lounges, the customer experience is way better. There are definitely airlines where they focus a lot on gadgets and gizmos and, a sexy looking seat. But if it's absolute chaos when they're boarding the aircraft, it doesn't necessarily make for a low stress situation. And that's been my personal experience with Emirates Airlines, that they're not very good at boarding the aircraft. It's a bit too stressful. But once you're on board, it's pretty nice. And here in the United States, I remain a firm fan of Alaska Airlines. I'm fortunate enough that really Seattle is their hub, so I get to fly on them a lot. And I've got very little to complain about with Alaska. Now, I noticed that they merged recently with Virgin America, which gets another very good reputation. But I'm really curious to see how they manage the merger of those two tribes. I have a feeling they might screw it up a little bit. So that's it. in general, one world better than the other alliances. Emirates is not bad. Just sometimes they're really lousy at loading the aircraft, which you think that would be kind of a basic thing they would be able to get their head around. And Alaska here in the United States, I think is hard to beat as a full service airline. And all of that is couched in the fact that I travel so much, folks, that I can't do it if I'm not in the front of the plane. I made a decision 5-6 years ago to spend the money on the expensive tickets rather than ruin my health. So I do live in a little bit of a bubble, and your mileage might vary, as they say, if you're sitting somewhere in the back of the plane.
Yeah, I mean, we did skip over class of service in the Kanban conversation, but I guess we're having it now. So, David, I think our hour is coming to a close, unfortunately. And as we say quite often on the good podcasts, or the ones that we like to think are good, we probably could have gone for easily another hour. I think that rings true here. Is there anything upcoming in the next few weeks or months that you'd like to plug? I know you have some conferences coming soon.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. The Lean Kanban North America Conference, we now tag that the Alternative Path to Enterprise Agility Conference, is coming up in Washington, D.C., 8th to 10th of May. And the URL for that is lkna17.leankanban.com. And immediately on the back of that, we have our Kanban Leadership Retreat, which is in Annapolis, Maryland, from the 10th of May to the 12th. The Leadership Retreat is a consultants camp event. It's a sort of open space. And it was originally conceived as an alumni event for my Kanban coaching masterclass, and also for accredited Kanban trainers. But don't let that scare you off, because it's open for public registration. And if you want some real quality face time with experts, people like Colleen Johnson, then you want to come along to the Leadership Retreat, and we'd love to see you. But meanwhile, we have a fantastic program in Tyson's Corner for the main conference on the 8th to the 10th of May, with some really good public sector case studies, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Labor, the State of Virginia Department of Corrections, and some other US-based big corporate examples. I'm struggling with, off the top of my head, the companies. Certainly Capital One are there, and sorry, it's escaping me right now what the other ones. But take a look at the program on the website. It's I think really a very good mainstream program this year. And it really demonstrates that Kanban has crossed the chasm and that people are having success with it at large scale.
Yeah, and the fact that you just wrapped off about 5 or 6 government agencies that are using it speaks volumes as well. And I guess
it's very encouraging.
And you mentioned the website. Where beyond including the website, but how can folks get a hold of you? The different websites, and we mentioned the Twitter, but it might be worth mentioning one more time.
Yeah, so the company website is leankanban.com, and even if you just click on info or sales there and email me, it always gets to me. But my email's my initials, dja@leankanban.com, and my professional Twitter is LKI, that's the initials of Lean Kanban Incorporated, LKI_DJA.
Cool.
And yeah, those are the easiest places to find me. I'm sure people can find me on LinkedIn also.
Yeah. And if you don't own, David, if you're listening to this and you're inspired and you do not own the Blue Book, go out and buy the Blue Book immediately. And if you have a friend that doesn't have it, buy it for them.
Yeah, and if you like it, you can buy it for your company in bulk. We sell them directly. We customize them for companies. If people are interested in that. Minimum order's 20 copies, and you can have your own logo on it and some insert pages at the front.
Awesome.
Not everyone knows that, but we sell a lot of books directly to corporates.
Cool. Well, David, we appreciate having you on today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. And for the listeners, if you're not yet following us on Twitter, we are at Agile Uprising, and you can join our free network at coalition.agileuprising.com. Colleen, Andrew, thank you guys for joining in.
Thanks.
This is great. Thanks.
All right, and we'll talk to you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.